evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
Mahoning Drive-In Radio. Welcome back to another episode of the Mahoning Drive-In Radio podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the love and celebration, whatever Virgil usually says, of our beloved drive-in culture. Joining me this week to promote our May 14th screening of Bloodsport on 35 millimeter is Austin Trunick. Austin is the author of the Canon Film Guide Volume 1, 1980 to 1984, and the Canon Film Guide Volume 2, 1985 to 1987, and the forthcoming, I'll ask him when with a lot of pressure in my voice, Canon Film Guide Volume 3. Welcome, Austin. Tell us all about you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's good to be back, and I'm looking forward to the summer season coming up and getting back out to visit you guys.
We call these the Canon Corner. I believe we've been doing a series of these, and the fate always makes it just you and I when we do these, which is fun. It's a nice friendly chat, and you basically inform me and the listeners all about the intricacies of these various Canon Films productions. And I love it because a lot of these I have seen, some of these I haven't over the years. But like with your books, there's so much behind the scenes with these films. Canon was such a wild and woolly studio that really made its mark on the film populace for a decade or so. And this was a Jean-Claude VanDamme film. I'll tell you what I do know. This was a Jean-Claude VanDamme film released in 1988. It co-stars Leah Ayres, who I know as Fake Marcia from the Brady's TV series in the early 90s, which I was a big fan of, the Brady Bunch in general. It has Forrest Whitaker in it, which you wouldn't expect to be in a Jean-Claude VanDamme martial arts film. Bolo Young, who was in a lot of these films and a lot of films before that. And Philip Chan, who is a Hong Kong actor that I recognize. I can't tell you what he's been in, but I know he's been in about 200 movies that I watched from the 80s and 90s. So how did Bloodsport come to be?
It's a wild story. You left out Donald Gibb, though. Most people know him from the Revenge of the Nerds films too. He plays a very different role in this film, kind of as Jean-Claude Van Damme's like badass buddy and the guy that he has to ultimately avenge at a point in the film.
He was one of those guys who always played like a big jock or a biker in something, or like a heavy metal dude. His persona was always kind of comedic, so that's always weird to me when I see him in anything that was serious.
Yeah, and he's kind of like the comedic role in this, I suppose. He has some funny lines at least, but he's playing as a big, huge proto MMA type guy. And yeah, Bloodsport's a wild, interesting case. It is based on the quote unquote true life story, for the people listening in the audio, I'm making quotation marks in the air right here, of Frank Dukes, who is the role that Jean-Claude Van Damme plays in here. And it only concentrates on a very small part of Frank's life, again, quotation marks in the air, his life story. And like, really, if you're going to follow Frank's life story, it's the least interesting part, which is funny as the biggest movie, because his claims are much more wild, and I'll get into it in a moment. But he had basically risen to fame. He was a martial arts instructor out in the West Coast. And you can find his own newspaper ads. I'll post some of these once this is live. You can find me online, and I'll share some of these old ads for Frank's dojos he ran. But the newspaper ads would claim that he was the first white person, first American, first Westerner to be taught the art of ninjutsu by a secret clan of ninjas out in Japan. And it's, very similar to the plot of American Ninja or Enter the Ninja even. Many Canon movies have the same plot that is Frank Dukes' real, quote unquote, air quotes again, life story, his origin story. But this is what he claimed in his ads in the newspapers for if you want to go take fighting lessons from this guy. Other claims that he had, and these came out in later years, back 1980, I think November 1980 was the famous first story, the story of the Kumite, the story of what became Bloodsport was told. And it was in the pages of Black Belt magazine, which is a legit martial arts magazine. And it's something that Sheldon Lettich, the writer of Bloodsport, and a lot of the people who kind of bought into Frank's story, thinking that this was the true story of something that happened, they believed it because it was published in the pages of Black Belt magazine. This is the premier magazine, like martial arts magazine, covering this new growing realm of sports, I suppose. So they had no reason not to believe it. But even Black Belt magazine in this article, which is wonderful, gets into some details that aren't in the movie, and they continue to cover it even after the movie became a big hit. And you can learn about what happened in Frank's real life, quote unquote, story before and after the action of Bloodsport. But some of the claims he made beyond just competing in the Kumite is he was recruited into the Marines. He fought in Vietnam. He was basically a commando, like a Arnold Schwarzenegger, John Matrix style commando almost. But he fought in Vietnam, and some of the things he did in Vietnam, he rushed a machine gun that was saved his entire platoon by just running straight into a machine gun and killing the guy shooting it. He claims to have killed over 100 Viet Cong just by himself in a single day. He once crawled across a minefield to save a baby that was in danger and carried it again on his like back across the minefield crawling through these mines. So these are some of the heroic claims that didn't make it into the movie Bloodsport. This is also when he's a young man, because he was also like recognized by the US government as this great fighter. When he finished in Vietnam at the age of 19 is when he was invited to come compete in this top secret martial arts tournament for just the world's best martial artists. It was taking place in the Bahamas in his story, and it's largely the same as his story is largely what happens in Bloodsport. It's truncated, but I feel like a lot of people who listen to this probably have seen the movie. It's probably Cannon's last big hit, and to this day probably like one of the top 5 movies that people know when they think of Cannon. But he goes to this island. In the movie it's Hong Kong, and in the story it's the Bahamas, and he fights in this tournament where there's hundreds of the world's best martial artists, only a few from each country. Again, like a very like MMA style thing where they're all invited, they all have different styles, but it's a single elimination. You fight 20 fights a day in his story, 20 fights a day, and as soon as you lose a fight, you get knocked out. And there he was crowned the World Kumite Champion. He was given a trophy and a ceremonial sword, according to his story, and he was allowed to talk about it in magazines because they wanted more Americans to know about the Kumite, and hopefully so that America would present its best fighters, but he couldn't give any other details about who was organizing it because it's all top secret. Again, he had a trophy and a ceremonial sword. After Bloodsport blew up and it became this big sort of theatrical hit and journalists started poking into it, they found out that this trophy that he had was produced sometime in the early 80s at a local trophy shop in LA down the street from his dojo. His sword, they asked him what happened to his ceremonial sword that he had. And his story is that there was a boatload of orphans, I think Filipino orphans, that were kidnapped by pirates, and they were going to be trafficked. And he went to trade them the sword for the boatload of orphans for their freedom. They took the sword and they went back on the deal. So he swam out to this ship full of pirates, climbed aboard, kicked all of their asses, killed them all, and then saved the orphans and piloted the ship home. This is the real, yeah,
cool.
Yeah, this is Frank Dukes' story. So that's why anybody who's familiar with the story that just focuses on the martial arts tournament and leaves out all of his secret medals of honor, that he has no record of his military service because what he did was so important to the military that it's so classified. No one can ever talk about it.
Did he ever write a book, or was this just a series of articles in Black Belt magazine?
It was, there were articles all over. He's also he still defends his stories. If you go online, you can find him, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook, blogs and things like that. You can get, I feel like there's a late 80s issue of Black Belt or Fighter magazine or Combat magazine. One of the ones, they had an interview with Jean-Claude VanDamme, and then they also talked to Frank Dukes, and he tells about what happens in Bloodsport, and what happened, how the movie differed from real life, and he talks about how he became best friends with Bola Young's character, and that they go out on double dates in Hong Kong, which the story is like his life story is now set in Hong Kong after the movie came out, even though it was in the Bahamas beforehand. That's I'm rambling here, but I'm just fascinated by the what again, like Bloodsport, great movie, but the whole life story of Frank Dukes could make 50, like a James Bond. He was James Bond, if like the ninja James Bond, if they could make a whole entire franchise out of his life story if they wanted to follow it according to how it happened.
It sounds like one of those book series you used to see, like the Destroyer or the Mac Bolan books. Like it could have been a great series of pulp novels.
Right, right. With great painted covers and great story, but it's, I guess we'll rewind back to early 80s. These stories come out in Black Belt. He writes something that's like a 1,000 page Vietnam novel, never published, but it was over 1,000 pages, and he finds an agent for it because the agent says this guy's story is great. We have no reason to doubt it. Like he has no way of proving his life story, but we also can't disprove it at this time. This is pre-internet. This is, you're just taking this guy and his like friends at their word, who people are vouching for him. And one of the agent's other clients is Sheldon Lettich, who was the screenwriter of Bloodsport. He wrote one of the Rambo sequels. He ended up going on to direct some Van Damme movies. They worked together a lot after this film, but they shared an agent. So the agent introduced Sheldon to Frank Dukes, and the two of them hit it off. But the idea was that we're going to boil this 1,000 page story down to, a not regular novel length. But meanwhile, Sheldon gets to know Frank, and he reads these stories and sees clearly that this martial arts tournament, like this part of your life story, is a movie in itself. Like this is cool. Let's do something with this, and ends up writing the script that would ultimately become Bloodsport. The original draft had more of the backstory. It had more of it had stuff about the military training. You don't see anything really about Van Damme's military life, but stuff that once the movie gets to Canon Films, it costs money. We're going to cut that stuff out. We can't shoot those things. So it trimmed down just to like mostly in one location, the final film. Like they cut it down the budget to something that was very easy to shoot. Following through with Sheldon is he gets it to Mark Dessal, who is the producer of the film. He also produced Kickboxer, and he takes the movie to Canon, thinking like, this is 1985. Canon is making, all the Shokasugi movies. They're making all the Chuck Norris movies. This is, if we're going to get like a mid-budget martial arts movie made, like these are the guys to go to. And Canon's into it. They like Frank Dukes' life story. They like the premise. They do not, like, this is pre-Van Damme. They purchase it initially thinking it's a Chuck Norris project. Chuck's in his 40s at this point. He's made a couple Canon movies. He's too old to play 19-year-old Frank Dukes. So it's one of these things. So Chuck turns it down. Next, they look at it as a Michael Dudikoff project, which I could see. This is like right after American Ninja is becoming a big thing for Canon, and Michael Dudikoff could have fit in it, but Michael is, as perfect as in the American Ninja films, he's not a full-blown martial artist. If you're making a movie that is Canon's version of Enter the Dragon or a Bruce Lee film, that's what they wanted to do. You need a real martial artist to do it. So the script sat around for a little bit. We're gonna jump back again. Back in time, because this Bloodsport is just an example of all these different storylines kind of like colliding here. All these people colliding at one time at Canon to make this. But Jean-Claude VanDamme, he actually had met Menachem Golan way back before even he had come to the US, but after Golden Globus bought Canon and made it into the 80s B-movie giant that it became, he had gone, he's much younger, late 70s, maybe 1980, goes to MIFED in Milan, the film festival there, sneaks in, basically, and he wants to be a movie star. Van Damme's heroes at the time were Bruce Lee and Jean-Paul Belmondo. Like, think of young man growing up in Brussels. Those are two perfect. He was a legitimate karate, the competitive karate. He was part of the Belgian karate team. Like, he was trained. I mean, any movie you see him. You could do this. You see the splits, you see the kicks. This guy legitimately trained in martial arts. So he was competing for a long time. At this time, but he wanted to be a movie star. That's his thing. The martial arts were a way of him getting into the movies. So he goes in and he takes some martial arts magazine clippings, some headshots, and is just basically hanging around the festival for looking for producers and handing out his headshot. And he meets Menachem Golan there before. This is the just Golden Globus Pictures. This is the 1970s era. Like they're still working in Israel, doing some, they got Tony Curtis and they're doing some Operation Thunderbolt, Sybil Danning. Like they're making their foray towards Hollywood at this point. And you never know, but he met him there, and you never know whether Menachem was just humoring him so he could move on with his day, or if he genuinely was impressed with this young man. But Menachem gave young Jean-Claude, his business card and said, "Hey, you should look me up when you're in Hollywood. When you move to Hollywood, you can be an actor." And Van Damme did not forget that. He spent a few years running a gym with him and his friend Michael Kesey, who plays Tong Po in Kickboxer. He also has a role as one of the fighters in Bloodsport. But yeah, he's mostly the big bad in Kickboxer is what he's best known for. But they were best friends. They ran a gym together, and Van Damme socks all his money away, moves to Hollywood in the early 80s, and doesn't quite become a movie star because he doesn't really know that much English, it's hard to break into American movies when, you see how good his English is in Bloodsport almost 6 to 7 years later, and you can imagine how he was earlier. And so it takes a long time, but he hustles the whole time. He goes to auditions, he ends up, he has some other smaller roles in movies, but he hustles. He does things to make ends meet. He works as a waiter. He works as a not cab driver, but limousine driver for a while. He borderline homeless, I would say at certain points, because he talks about getting a membership at Gold's Gym, which is famous pumping iron Hollywood gym with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lou Ferrigno, Chuck Norris, all those guys. But he talks about getting a membership, not only so he can keep in shape, but so he has a place to shower. This is young Jean-Claude Van Damme really, really working. He talks about, in one of the very first Bloodsport interviews when this movie's blowing up and appearing on the covers of many of the magazines that first broke the Frank Dux stories, he talks about 30 some times where he tried to get a meeting with Menachem at Cannon, where he, for lack of a better word, it sounds like he was stalking him. Menachem Golan was being stalked by young Jean-Claude Van Damme. He knew his car, so he'd wait and he'd see Menachem's car pull in and he'd try to get a meeting. And it was not for nothing. Jean-Claude Van Damme appears as an extra in Breaking, him and Michael Kesey, his roommate. Yeah, and that's because he was hanging around the Cannon offices, and that was something that he's waiting there trying to meet Menachem Golan because he got his business card from him 5 years ago. And, they're like, "Oh, we're shooting, we're spending a few weeks shooting this movie. We need extras here because we don't even have time to find extras on the street. You're in the lobby. Come be in this movie." And that's just, he did it. He also met Chuck Norris that way. Chuck Norris was coming in and Jean-Claude Van Damme sort of just jumps in his way. It's like, "Hey, I want to be in your movies. I'm a movie star." You can imagine his accent and showing his splits and his kicks and things like that. So
I was going to say, I imagine a lot of split displays.
Yes. So yeah, that was many, many splits. I'm sure you could have walked into the Cannon offices, any day from 1983 to 1985 and had a good chance of running into Jean-Claude Van Damme doing a split in the lobby just for whoever came through.
My friends and I, when he was first coming to power, and it was every trailer had a shot of him doing a split in it for any reason possible. And I recently watched the new 4K disc of Double Impact, and he's not in that film for 5 seconds before he's doing a split on screen. I'm like, gotta get it in there. But,
yeah.
To be fair, though, it is very impressive.
It is. It's, if you're gonna have a trademark, you can't think of another actor who does better splits than Jean. If you think of movie splits, It's him and no one else.
That could be the next book, by the way. I'm giving you that.
Okay, movie splits.
Great. 101 greatest movie splits. People love a list
Yeah. Oh man, I'll add it to my list of
of dumb ideas people have suggested to you. Excellent.
Oh, but yeah, Van Damme, he ends up befriending Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris first hires him to be a bouncer at his like seafood restaurant in that he owned briefly. So Jean-Claude was a bouncer at Woody's Wharf. That was the name of the place. And Chuck was a stakeholder in, and then he joins his kind of training crew. There's a great video of behind the scenes of Missing in Action where you see Chuck Norris is talking to a reporter and kind of he's punching not a bag, but the two like padded things that go on your arms. And he's punching them, and you look and you're like, do I recognize that? It's Jean-Claude Van Damme holding those out in the Philippines where they shot this movie. Because Chuck was like, you can come and you can carry my bags. And he has one of his second, he wasn't credited on Breakin', but he's in the, he's credited at the end of Missing in Action as a stunt performer. He should basically join Chuck's stunts team, which was run by Aaron Norris, his brother, and did stunts in that. He does some stunt work in other Cannon movies. He worked a lot for Cannon before he got to Bloodsport, but he kind of just realized he's like, I can't really be just following Chuck Norris around if I'm always going to be playing not even second fiddle, but just like I can't be his like stunt man. That's not a way to become a star.
Carrying his duffel.
Yeah. It's really his footman. Like it's a Downton Abbey type situation, I'm imagining. But yeah, so he left that. He was in Predator. I'm sure people understand, like knew that, at least in the earlier cuts of Predator. Van Damme was hired to be the original Alien, and it's great. You can see this footage online. It came out maybe 10 years ago. It was released online, and the original suit was this big, goofy looking. It looks like some sort of kaiju, something that fight Godzilla. This big, stiff, bright red. It looks like like a giant, oversized lobster that should be kicking over like cardboard cities. And this was the original Predator. And Van Damme got there, and there's two. I mean, depending on who you believe, different reasons why he was hired or why he was fired from it, or whether he quit. He said he quit because he realized it wasn't. He was fitted for a giant foam latex costume. I don't know why he thought he would get to show off his face, but McTiernan says he was fired because he complained too much. I've also heard that he was fired because he was jumping and doing flips and just doing all these like goofy things, trying to show off, and they were just like, this is too much, like not what we're imagining the Predator would be. But he worked on the Predator, ultimately does not appear in the final film, but again, like he was hustling for years and years. Finally, Bloodsport, through the process of stalking Menachem Golan and watching his car, he's out driving his limousine that he's driving, and Michael Kesey is just riding with him, and they see this restaurant, and Menachem's out there with some foreign distributors, and he recognizes the car, recognizes him going in. He pulls the limo over, has Michael Kesey like sit in the driver's seat so they don't get a ticket, and he runs in. And this is a famous story. And again, this is something that like there's so many different stories depending on who told it. Menachem tells it one way. Jean-Claude told it to me one way, which I also don't think is completely the full truth. But how I think it happened is he went into the restaurant. Basically, finally he's like, hey, I've been trying to meet with you forever. I've been in this movie. I've done this work for you. You gave me your business card all these years ago. Menachem's trying to brush him off because he's trying to have an important business dinner. And Jean-Claude does another one of his second to his split, his famous moves, but he does a high kick. And he kicks up, and apparently this is something Jean-Claude would do in the 80s, maybe still today if you're hanging out, a party trick. But he kicks, and he kicked above his foot, his heel, just right above Menachem's head. And just like, so you hear, like, you feel like the heel go through your hair. And Menachem, from all I've heard, was annoyed by this, which obviously, if a strange man and speaking a foreign accent runs into a fancy restaurant and roundhouse kicks over your head.
At your head, yeah.
he would, yeah, it's understandable. It's like it's that's not cool. It's not something a normal person reacts positively to. But the distributors that he was with were actually impressed because they weren't the ones getting that probably they didn't feel like they might be getting assaulted in a restaurant. Like,
They weren't feeling his foot wind.
yes, yes. So Menachem finally says, "Okay, come in, we'll talk. Like, we'll finally have this meeting." And Jean-Claude goes home. He calls, months without a call back. Still, Menachem just is not interested in this kid. Finally, he gets the meeting, and it is Christmas Eve. This is Christmas Eve, 1985, I believe. And it's Menachem's last meeting of the day. Of course, Golden Globus are both still working. They're still making deals. They're working through the night. Most of the offices are empty, but VanDamme gets in there, and again, this is the way he told it to me. Um, he was desperate at this point. He gets in there and it's like, I've been waiting so long to meet you. He's like, he goes in Menachem's office, fancy corner office in the building, takes off his shirt, does splits on the chairs, shows him his biceps, and says, "You get all this for free. You put me in a meeting, like make a start. You get all this for free." And Menachem, who at this point had the Bloodsport script, that both of his stars that he'd bought it for Chuck Norris and Michael Dudikoff basically said no. He's like, fine, like you do this, like you fine, this is yours, like this, just as like to get rid of both things, like killing two birds with one stone. He did not like the Bloodsport script, and he did not care for this young Belgian future superstar. And that's really what led to Bloodsport getting off the ground. The movie was another one. It's a lot of favors being called in. This movie shouldn't have been as good or as big a hit as it was because, again, it was a script that Cannon didn't have any faith in at this point. That it was a star that I think Menachem just really gave it to get this kid to stop stalking him at this point, quit falling around almost, just to get him off his back. And then you have this the director. Actually, the director was Newt Arnold, who you guys are actually showing his other Cannon work with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So Tobe Hooper that's another story for another day that I've written at length about in the book, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 had to come out, it had to be shot, it was written, shot, and released to hit a deadline. They had promised this movie. You can look at the trailers, the pre-release trailers for it are hilarious because like Cannon had not seen any footage. They did not know it was a comedy at that point. They did not know what was going on because the movie was being written as it was being shot. And as it was getting close to the deadline, they had problems with Tobe Hooper going way over on Invaders from Mars, spending way more money, taking much longer on the shoot, and they could not do that because they had to pay penalties to distributors if the movie was not in theaters in, I think it was August 12th of 1986, and it finished shooting on July 4th of July. They after an all-night shoot. So that tells you how long like they had before it was in theaters nationwide. Like it was crazy story. But they were basically afraid that Tobe wouldn't turn it in, so they sent Newt Arnold out to be an enforcer. Who he hadn't directed a movie in over a dozen years, but he had been an assistant director on Sorcerer with William Friedkin. He had been an assistant director on, I think, The Godfather 2 or a Second AD or some sort of. He'd been in all of these like secondary roles on these like. He's got an incredible resume, but they had sent him out basically to like, you're gonna shoot second unit stuff. You're gonna shoot scenes just in case Tobe can't get this movie done. And it was one of these things where you talk to people who worked on the film and they were kind of bitter about him being there, and Tobe definitely was kind of, it almost sounds like trying to sabotage his work because he resented this guy being here as kind of the grown up in the room, I suppose. But his favor for doing this, basically flying down to Texas and shooting in the heat and the horrible conditions that were Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, spectacularly horrible, like in a newspaper facility, and 1,000-degree heat with all the lighting and no water and things. Oh, when you have Caroline Williams out there, just ask her what those last few weeks of shooting Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 were like, because she has some
I can imagine.
both wonderful things to say, but also like it was kind of horrifying to
It
be
sounds
there.
like the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The
Right.
cast of that describes that experience as though they had gone through Vietnam.
Yeah, that's Bill Johnson. If you ever have a chance to read interviews with him or talk to him, who was inside the Leatherface suit in 2, just talks about how like Canon, they're like their pallets of water didn't show up for like days, so like people were only not only overheating but getting sick and things like that.
Right.
And then they'd used like cadaver parts and stuff for the, and then parts of like livestock and stuff for some of the gore. So you're in a building that's reaching 150 degrees in the middle of summer in Austin, Texas, and you've got rotting meat and no water and studio lighting. And but anyways, Newt pulled a favor for Canon. They were going to give him a movie, so they had to give Newt Arnold a film, and his was Bloodsport, because that's another film that's like, okay, we're going to also satisfy this guy we made a promise to. So 3 things. It was a movie from a script they had no faith in anymore. That wasn't a priority for them, at least. With an actor that they were trying to get rid of almost at that point, and with a director that they owed a favor to. And
This is like a clearing off the desk production.
Exactly. And the movie was shot in Hong Kong because their co-financier was in Hong Kong, which is cool because you get some scenes filmed in Kowloon before it was torn down. You don't see that in many Hollywood movies. There's some Hong Kong films, of course, some action films where you get to see it, but you get some cool shots and stuff you didn't see. Americans didn't get to see. Very foreign looking at the time. And the first cut of it is apparently atrocious, even according to Van Damme, according to Lettich. Menachem hated it. Golden Globe has shelved it. The movie sat on the shelf for 2 years, which is incredible because, by all accounts, it was just bad. Meanwhile, like Van Damme goes on to do some other things. He No Retreat, No Surrender comes out and does very well in Europe. Not as well here, but people know it now. But Bloodsport's just sitting gathering dust, and this is back when Canon would release anything. Like they put out
some of the standards weren't high.
Yes. Then this is a movie that they will not give a release to, not even direct to video at that point. It is sitting on the shelves that are shot for very little money. So finally they go and they're getting into more money troubles, and Van Damme's heartbroken, of course. This was going to be his big star-making film, so he's still going by the Canon offices. Hey, what can I do? Like, we can shoot new stuff. They finally let him into the editing bay. Again, it's one of these things probably just to get him off their backs, with Michael Duthie, who was one of Canon's like house editors. You look at his credits and he worked on dozens of Canon movies and worked on another several dozen that he's not credited for, just as like an in-house doctor. And he sits down in the editing booth for a couple weeks with Jean-Claude VanDamme, who basically the two of them recut the movie. And Van Damme he's done this in other films too. Like Cyborg, he went back and shot new scenes and choreographed new scenes because Canon did not like the original cut, and he helped edit it. So like Van Damme worked as basically an uncredited editor on both of those movies, but he understood certain things as, again, like I think as someone who's a big fan of like Bruce Lee movies and like who knows martial arts fans, not Western ones, he knows, again, he said, especially from Bruce Lee, but like the action is one thing, being able to do the moves, but pausing on the pose afterwards, Bruce is, holding and making the wild noises after he kicks someone or punches someone is just as important as taking the swings or the kicks or whatever he's doing. So that there was more of that. That was a lot of when Van Damme talks about, he's like, we recut the fight scenes a lot to some like Bloodsport's a movie full of like crazy Van Damme faces, because that was part of his performance. He was very consciously doing this, just based on the martial arts films that he'd grown up seeing in theaters in Europe. And another thing he does is in it's a movie where the impacts happen more than once, and you'll see this in other Van Damme movies. But in a Chuck Norris movie, you get a kick and you get a punch, and it looks, they cut it away fast enough so you can't see that like he's not really connecting. Van Damme pushed things that got him in trouble movies, like he basically like blinded a guy on the set of Cyborg, for kick it, like, so stuff like he pushed it. But like Bloodsport, a lot of the stuff is, there was more contact. Like a lot of the stuff came closer. They were using real martial artists who weren't afraid to impact each other. So when you watch the movie, if Van Damme kicks someone or punches someone in the nuts, you see him do it 1, 2, 3 times from different angles, and these are different takes, and then you see it in slow motion, and it's something that it works very well for a martial arts movie. I mean, even today, if you watch, UFC or something, you see the replays over and over again. People know that if you see someone get hit, you want to see them to get that same hit over and over again. And
Jackie Chan would do that too. If he had a particularly impressive stunt, he would show it to you from a few angles, because I think the rationale was, why let it just go by in a flash when it's just so amazing? We're going to show you that we really did it, and you can be impressed like 3 or 4 times in a row.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why Jackie's one of the brilliant of any, not just martial arts, but any sort of choreographed, highly choreographed film. And that's why he's one of the geniuses. And on Bloodsport, I think that's why Bloodsport works so well, is the fight. It's a movie that the version we see is mostly fighting, and the fighting looks good. It looks cool, and even if it's not always believable, it's badass, which is important. So they recut it, and reportedly Menachem still hated it, but Yoram and Jean-Claude and all the people involved talked him into doing just a West Coast release, a tiny West Coast release. And it was a movie that they went to see, and then word of mouth, they went to see it again and again. It did better after these. And again, like telling you where their like faith was, I think this was released on the same weekend as Alien from LA, as far as like what Cannon's expectations were. But the movie ended up being like a word of mouth hit that took off, and it did well. It ended up getting a much wider release. It ended up getting all sorts of cable and movie deals, and that's where a lot of people saw it for the first time. But like Van Damme in the editing room with Cannon's in-house like editor saved the movie. It would have been shelved and released in direct-to-video in a reportedly, by all accounts, awful version that was unreleasable by Cannon standards. Wow. And went on to be one of their biggest hits, and especially like certainly one of their only really financial highlights of those like later years.
I remember it being big on video, on tape. Like this was one that other kids, I want to say, it would have come out on tape in '89, probably, right? I was in freshman in high school, and I remember everybody talking about it, talking about Bolo, talking about Kumite.
Yeah,
it was one that people, males of the teenage and older persuasion would rent again and again and again.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, obviously the first time I heard about Van Damme, but after that, it was like he was one of those go-to, if not in theaters, he was certainly a go-to action rental property that everybody was. Those tapes were rarely on the shelf for about a year after they came out. The box was there, the tape was not. And they were really popular. So this was his first hit, obviously.
Yeah.
Were there sequels to this, or am I thinking of the Kickboxer series?
They're not with him. Even Kickboxer 2 was an Albert Pune film that Van Damme's character is killed off like off screen in like a flashback in that movie, because Van Damme just outgrew those movies. Unfortunately for Cannon, it came at a time because this movie ended up being a big hit, and after they sat on it for a long time. Like had they released and done that well for them in 1987, like it could have really helped them stay alive for a while. But by the time it came out, it was just a little bit too late. They had a contract with him to do another film, and so and again, this is another thing, this is where Cannon was at the time. I'll save the full story of Cyborg, but sure. Cyborg was shot down at De Laurentiis' studio in the Carolinas, and Cannon was originally going to shoot back to back by Albert Pume, their Spider-Man movie, and their Masters of the Universe 2. And so they had started building sets for Spider-Man. They had shipped all the costumes from Masters of the Universe down there, and they were to shoot both these movies. And both those movies, for myriad reasons, ended up not happening. But they had people down there, they had costumes down there, they had sets down there. And they asked Albert Pune if he could do something with the costumes and the sets. So he basically came up with the idea for Cyborg over the weekend. And they had a contract, so they sent Van Damme down. He opted to do that. So it's just Cyborg is something that came together out of two movies that were just, had totally gone down in flames. And Cyborg is the movie that came from rose from the ashes of Masters 2 and Spider-Man. But again, they just came at a time where Van Damme was becoming this huge superstar. Pretty soon he'd be commanding the budgets that his salary would be higher than most Canon budgets for their final years.
How many films did he do with Canon? Was it just Bloodsport and Cyborg, or were there more?
Right. They also had a very small hand in distributing Kickboxer. That ended up being a movie that they had helped usher it into being made, but they didn't really reap as many of the benefits as as they should have had they had the belief in him earlier on.
And ultimately, he wound up, with the major studios. He was making films for Universal and things like that by the mid '90s, I guess.
Yeah, even Hard Target's '93.
Right.
You have Sudden Death. You have Time
Cop.
Yeah, early '90s to mid '90s. He was
from Cyborg, which is using leftover costumes and half-built sets, to major Universal sci-fi epics,
right?
Mortal Kombat, not Mortal Kombat, Street
Fighter.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. I saw him on the extras for the Blu-ray of Double Impact recently, and to go back to what you were saying about how he really was into the craft of filmmaking, if not as a director, you really can tell from some of his commentary and extras where he was really all about the camera angles and the editing and what worked on camera. And I was really impressed because I was at a distance looking at Van Damme. I always thought he was kind of this arrogant guy who made, some fair to middling to occasionally good movies, but really was full of ego. And in those extras, maybe he was back then, but in the extras, he seemed like an incredibly nice guy who really cared about movies, loved movies, and just wanted to make good movies, which makes you wish that, he'd get another chance someday. I don't know what his abilities are at this point, but he certainly has the charisma still.
Yeah, and he's got incredible comedic chops. I wish he did I think it was Amazon series stream with Jean-Claude Van Johnson, which was...
That was very funny.
So funny. It's I would oh gosh, I wish people with the power to make these direct to streaming movies would be let's do more, current day elder Van Damme comedies, because I would line up for those. But that's why I'm writing books and not working in the movies.
Where is Canon now to believe in a project such as this?
Well, they would have sat on it until it
right.
they didn't know what to do with them. But yeah, I do love Van Damme is any interviews where he does really get to talk about movies, or he's a film geek first and foremost. And again, some of these guys that Stallone, for all his images, is has a great sense of what makes a good script, how to rewrite a script, how to shoot a movie. He's a very good, Oscar-winning filmmaker. I shouldn't say he's an underrated, but as you wouldn't get it from his persona, but he had so much a hand in at his height, especially putting talent together, putting teams together, whether he's doing credit to rewrites or ghost rewrites on things. And Dolph Lundgren's a rocket scientist. These guys are all smarter than the roles that they play on screen.
So do you have any final thoughts on Bloodsport and its legacy, both in the world of 80s martial arts films, the Van Damme canon, and, if you will, the canon?
Oh, well, I do feel it's a pivotal film in a lot of ways. For Canon, it was their last big hit, and through 2020 vision, looking back, with the being able to look at it and like retrospectively, it's one of their most important films. It's one of the biggest films of their legacy. If you were gonna choose a few canon films to put on Mount Rushmore, like Van Damme's like crazy bloody nose face would be carved out in stone up there. It's one of the most important canon films. Like that's when my third book eventually someday does come out. There's certain movies that I can imagine like if I ever find my book at used bookstores, there's gonna be like the spine will be broken at certain places because those will be like the one chapter that people like read. And Bloodsport will be the one that in volume 3 that people will flip to and read first. And if it's the only thing they read, that'll be that chapter. But in larger regards, I mean, it made Van Damme, it shaped 90s movies. It gave us, you know, nearly a decade's worth of action films with prominently featuring splits. So it's important in that regard. And then just I mean, just culturally, I feel like it has to have at least some influence. And I mean, people know it better than like I can't pretend I know much about UFC or MMA, but like the rise in that, like I can't imagine people didn't seek that out. I know that not too far around the same time when like they started airing on cable and coming to rise, and that I have to imagine a movie like Bloodsport being a hit turns people's eyes towards that and might have some small degree in the popularity of that sort of thing, but also like video games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. I mean, sprites were based on Van Damme in some of those movies. Characters were based on Van Damme. We wouldn't have the entire, you know, 16-bit like fighting era of like video games and arcade games without Bloodsport. They're basically Bloodsport video games.
So how much longer did Canon carry on as an entity beyond the release of Bloodsport? Because I know your second book goes up to 1987, and you had said to me that the third is predominantly about the end and unrealized projects. What was the because they split, and I know 21st Century Films was created, and I remember going to see, in one of the G&Gs was involved with that. I went to see their Phantom of the Opera in the theater. And that was, I want to say, 89. So
Right.
what was we don't need to get into the full fall of
Right.
Canon, but just year wise, when did it kind of fall apart?
Well, the cousins, Golan Globus, the really the heart of what we think of as what people think of as canon, even though it existed years before and after. They broke up in '89, really in early '89. Golan split off for 21st Century. It was part of the deal. Basically, moved across the street and made films to compete with his cousin, and ended up a lot of the movies that sort of competing dueling Lambada movies is like the most famous one.
Was it both of them making Lambadas?
Yes, both of them
Oh,
made Lambada movies and released them on the same day.
I
Yeah,
remember both of those, and somehow, despite talking to you and the documentaries I've watched, I was unaware, or I did not retain that those both came from each half of. Oh, that's like some weird
yes.
cell dividing and subdividing kind of thing.
Yeah, it was a
Wow.
very strange that they were both rushing to beat each other in the theaters of the first Lambada movie in the theaters, and they were produced by two cousins across the street from each other with just like all the bile in the world at the time, all the bitterness that went into these two Lambada movies. They're both really fun. Like if Lambada ever comes back, that's a Mahoning double feature weekend.
We will have a double feature of the two best and only two Lambada films.
We just gotta wait for the dance craze to come back too, because that stuff comes in cycles. We gotta
It
wait
all
for
comes back around.
today's fourth graders to discover.
And then I'm going to have
Lambada.
you back saying everything there is to know about Lambada Set the Night on Fire.
Someday, about gosh, 5 or 6 years down the road, maybe. I'll predict Lambada will be back. Canon as a company, 21st went under a little bit faster. Canon really fell apart by about 94. They were still trickling things into theaters in 95 and on a video by 96, I think, as there's an American Ninja sequel that is released that had been shelved, but they had other movies that kind of bumped around and got put out on video to pay off like many debts. But 94 is really when they stopped production, when Canon as we know it went away.
And your third book, and here it comes. When's that coming out? Your third book is going to focus on explain it to the folks, tease them.
Well, so it's the direct to video era is what I lovingly call it of Canon. because outside of Bloodsport, and there's a few, of course, Chuck Norris movies, a few Charles Bronson movies that come out, but really, it's an era of canon where they were still producing a great deal of stuff, but these are the films that did not become cable classics, did not become. It's a lot of stuff that to me is interesting because when I was reading the first two books, like I was watching some of these from VHS tapes because DVD and Blu-ray, more and more of those have come out. We've even had some 4K canon movies, which is awesome at this point. But more movies in this volume than not are still only on VHS, which it's because they were released direct to VHS. So it's taking a lot longer because Canon didn't have the budget to send people to sets. They didn't. These movies played in like a few cities before being sent to videos. So they didn't get reviewed. No one was talking to these actors and directors. So a lot of my research is even more than the other books is firsthand. I don't have newspaper articles or things to go from. So it's like I've got to track down this actress who was in two movies and shot in Israel in 1991. I've got to find her like current name and find her on Facebook and talk to her like what happened because there so it's a lot of fun because I am exploring movies that really have not been written about even like with letterboxd reviews. Some of these are very very low for movies that you can watch on YouTube if you wanted to. But it's what made this process a lot slower for me, but it's also made it very, very interesting. I'm uncovering some fun stories. Some of the films that I've written about in there, the stories you're reading here, you just won't find anywhere else because I yanked them from somebody who's clearly tried to put this movie in their past and not like moved on from their film careers in a lot of these cases. But it's the direct to video era of canon. There are some big ones. You have Bloodsport in there. You have Kinjite, as far as you have some the great Chuck Norris versus the Antichrist movie Hellbound from 1994.
I used to have a poster for that in my dorm room in college.
Oh yeah, yeah. All right, that's
Yeah.
I mean,
So yeah,
that's again like another one where it's like I've read like different versions of the script and things like that, so you get into even weirder versions of this movie that exists. So it's a long time coming. It's still a long ways off, but I'm having fun with it. It's not on the near horizon by any means, I will say.
I
But
think if people buy your first two books, which are not light tomes, uh, they are thick books, densely packed with information. If they read those, then read them again. By that point, you have a pre-order out or something like that.
knock on wood.
Where's the best place for folks to get your books? Do you have a preferred way that is there a way they can buy them that you get more money?
Oh, I get the same cut pretty much everywhere. So in that case, support if you have a local bookstore or like even a non-local bookstore. There are great ones that small bookstores you can support online, and it's through a publisher where they don't really aren't able to discount it a whole bunch because it's they print in smaller batches. It is distributed through Ingram, which is a huge book distributor, so anyone can get it. I mean, at this point, even if it's your like Barnes and Noble, like support them before you go to Amazon, please.
We always push. We do a book
But
club at the drive-in, and every time I announce that, I pick a random bookstore that's in the region through bookshop.com, I believe it is, bookstore.com.
that's
And that way people can, if they want to order it online, they can get it and the money goes to a little bookstore somewhere. So, and they still get it mailed to their door. So maybe
that's
try that
perfect.
website for your
Yeah,
copies of the Canon Film Guide. Just
absolutely.
pick a
Please.
bookstore
Yeah,
in some small town that probably doesn't get a lot of love and send them a few bucks.
absolutely.
Where can people find you online for you? I know you're on a lot of podcasts and a lot of YouTube shows. I see your face and name popping up all the time in my feed, but where can they go to see you directly?
Well, I'm at Canon Film Guide all over the place. I'm posting probably the most often on Blue Sky now, not for any certain political reasons, but just because I like their AI policies. I'm sharing a lot of stuff that's artwork that is from productions that I don't know, and I feel weird enough sharing. And even though if it's like script pages from like alternate, I like to share things that you can't see other places. And I have a hard time now putting that in places that tell you directly that we're going to use this to train AI. I'm like, if it's not my work, I'm not going to put script pages on X anymore, or formerly known as Twitter, or even on Facebook. So if you want to see that stuff, Blue Sky's the best place. But I do post the more widely available stuff everywhere, whether it's on X or on Facebook or Instagram at Canon Film Guide. And if you want to send me a message just to talk movies or anything, any one of those places, you can get a hold of me, and I do check to respond and just to chit chat.
As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.
So we invite everyone within the sound of our voices or faces, if you're watching this on Patreon, to attend the Thursday, May 14th, 35 millimeter screening of, as I like to say, Bloodsport on the big screen at the Mahoning. Shout Kumite along with the soundtrack. Scream along with Van Damme, which would have made a great album in his heyday if you think about it. And we thank you, Austin, once again for joining us at trademark Canon Corner.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me back. And I can't wait to see you guys this summer out in PA.
Absolutely. And the next time I realize we're showing a Canon film, I'll make sure to let you know again. So as Virgil would say, and on that note, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night, and God bless you.